Have you ever wondered how one company could have so much power over a whole region? Or what it would be like if a business controlled everything from the crops you grow to the money you earn? Well, let's travel back in time to the 18th century and discover the story of the East India Company and how it became the Diwan of Bengal. On 12th August 1765, the Mughal emperor made a major decision. He appointed the East India Company as the Diwan, or Chief Financial Administrator, of Bengal. This means that the company wasn't just selling goods anymore, they were now in charge of collecting taxes, managing revenue, and even controlling the land. So, what did this mean for the people living in Bengal? Well, the East India Company started extracting a lot of money from the region. They saw Bengal as a way to fill their pockets, but the local farmers and craftsmen weren't benefiting. In fact, many of them were suffering. Can you picture working hard in the fields but not getting paid enough to buy food? That was the harsh reality for many. The situation got worse when a terrible famine struck in 1770, causing the death of around 10 million people. The British focused on collecting taxes instead of helping the starving people. It's like ignoring a friend in need because you're too busy counting your allowance. But there was a plan. In 1793, the East India Company introduced something called the permanent settlement. This meant that certain wealthy landowners, known as zamindars, were now responsible for collecting taxes from the farmers. It was supposed to create stability, but it ended up being a burden. The zamindars had to pay a fixed amount to the company, and if they couldn't collect enough from the farmers, they suffered too. As time went on, the company realized that the zamindars weren't improving agriculture or helping the farmers. In fact, many farmers had to take loans just to pay their rents, leading to a cycle of debt and despair. Picture this: you're trying to grow food, but every time you earn money, it goes straight to pay off your debts. Frustrating, right? To address these issues, the company introduced the Mehalwari system in 1822, where village headmen collected taxes instead of zamindars. This was a step towards change, but it still didn't solve the farmers' problems. Then came the Ryotwari system in South India, where farmers, called ryots, were made responsible for paying taxes directly. But guess what? The tax demands were often too high, leading many farmers to abandon their villages. Now, let's talk about a specific crop, indigo. This beautiful blue dye was in high demand in Europe, and the company wanted more of it. They forced farmers to grow indigo instead of food crops, which made things even worse. Can you imagine being told what to plant, even if it meant you and your family might go hungry? Why the demand for Indian indigo? Indigo plants thrive in tropical climates, making Indian indigo a preferred choice for manufacturers in Italy, France, and Britain for dyeing textiles. Indian indigo, being rare and in high demand, commanded a very high price in the European market. By the end of the 18th century, the demand for Indian indigo surged. At the same time, supplies from the West Indies and America collapsed due to various factors, leading to a significant reduction in global indigo production. The company expanded the area under indigo cultivation in India to meet the rising demand for indigo in Europe. How was indigo cultivated? There were two types of indigo cultivation, niche and rhyoti. Within the system of niche cultivation, the planter produced indigo in lands that he directly controlled. He bought the land or rented it from other zamindars and produced indigo by directly employing hired laborers. The problem with niche cultivation: this cultivation needed fertile and big lands, and it was difficult to get big areas as they were already highly populated. For this, they had to force out the population, which led to conflicts. Niche cultivation on a large scale required many plows and bullocks, and investing in the purchase and maintenance of plows was a big problem. Availability of labor was also a problem as peasants were engaged in rice cultivation at the same time. Indigo on the land of ryots in the Ryoti system, the planters forced the ryots to sign a contract agreement, Satta. Those who signed the contract got cash advances from planters at low interest rates to produce indigo. The peasants got very low prices for the indigo they produced, and the cycle of loans never ended. Indigo Rebellion in 1859 riots in Bengal resisted growing indigo, leading to social ostracism of those who worked for the planters. Gomasthas, agents sent to collect rents, were often subjected to violence. The local zamindars and village headmen supported the Bengal riots in their revolt against the planters. Following the revolt of 1857, the British government became concerned about further uprisings. Intellectuals from Calcutta quickly moved to the indigo districts as the revolt spread. The British government established the Indigo Commission to investigate indigo production practices. Post-revolt, indigo production in Bengal collapsed. In 1917, Mahatma Gandhi, upon being urged by a peasant from Bihar, visited Champaran. His visit marked the start of the Champaran movement, which opposed the indigo planters. In summary, the story of Indian indigo is about more than just a valuable dye, it's about the struggles of farmers, the economic shifts in Europe, and the fight for fairness. From the cultivation challenges to the eventual rebellion, indigo not only colored textiles but also the very fabric of society. We hope that you have understood the topic. You can now study chapter notes, watch video lectures and solve MCQ tests of this chapter on EduRev to ensure you score well in your school exams. And that's not all, you also get amazing courses for maths, science, English, Hindi, and much more for class 8. Thank you.